Chapter 5. Nathaniel.
"Above all,"
said his master,
"there is one fact that we must drive into your wretched little skull now, so that you'll never afterwards forget. Can you guess what that fact is?"
"No, sir," the boy said.
"No?"
The bristling eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. Mesmerized, the boy watched them disappear under the hanging white thatch of hair. There, almost coyly, they remained just out of sight for a moment, before suddenly descending with a terrible finality and weight.
"No. Well then,"
the magician bent forward in his chair.
"I shall tell you."
With a slow, deliberate motion, he placed his hands together so that the fingertips formed a steepled arch, which he pointed at the boy.
"Remember this,"
he said in a soft voice.
"Demons are very wicked. They will hurt you if they can. Do you understand this?"
The boy was still watching the eyebrows. He could not wrench his gaze away from them. Now they were furrowed sternly downwards, two sharp arrowheads meeting. They moved with a quite remarkable agility, up, down, tilting, arching, sometimes together, sometimes singly. With their parody of independent life, they exerted a strange fascination on the boy. Besides, he found studying them infinitely preferable to meeting his master's gaze. The magician coughed dangerously.
"Do you understand?"
"Oh, yes, sir."
"Well now, you say yes, and I'm sure you mean yes, and yet—"
One eyebrow inched skywards musingly.
"And yet, I do not feel convinced that you really, truly understand."
"Oh, yes, sir. Yes, I do, sir. Demons are wicked, and they are hurtful, and they will hurt you if you let them, sir." The boy fidgeted anxiously on his cushion. He was eager to prove that he had been listening well. Outside, the summer sun was beating on the grass and the hot pavements. An ice cream van had passed merrily under the window 5 minutes before. But only a bright rim of pure daylight skirted the heavy red curtains of the magician's room. The air within was stuffy and thick. The boy wished for the lesson to be over, to be allowed to go. "I have listened very carefully, sir," he said. His master nodded.
"Have you ever seen a demon?"
he asked. "No, sir. I mean, only in books."
"Stand up."
The boy stood quickly, one foot almost slipping on his cushion. He waited awkwardly, hands at his sides. His master indicated a door behind him with a casual finger.
"You know what's through there?"
"Your study, sir."
"Good. Go down the steps and cross the room. At the far end you'll find my desk. On the desk is a box. In the box is a pair of spectacles. Put them on and come back to me. Got that?"
"Yes, sir."
"Very well, then. Off you go."
Under his master's watchful eye, the boy crossed to the door, which was made of a dark, unpainted wood with many whorls and grains. He had to struggle to turn the heavy brass knob, but the coolness of its touch pleased him. The door swung open soundlessly on oiled hinges, and the boy stepped through to find himself at the top of a carpeted staircase. The walls were elegantly papered with a flowery pattern. A small window halfway down let in a friendly stream of sunlight. The boy descended carefully, one step at a time. The silence and sunlight reassured him and quelled some of his fears. Never having been beyond this point before, he had nothing but nursery stories to furnish his ideas of what might be waiting in his master's study. Terrible images of stuffed crocodiles and bottled eyeballs sprang garishly into his mind. Furiously, he drove them out again. He would not be afraid. At the foot of the staircase was another door, similar to the first, but smaller and decorated in its center with a 5-sided star painted in red. The boy turned the knob and pushed. The door opened reluctantly, sticking on the thick carpet. When the gap was wide enough, the boy passed through into the study. Subconsciously, he had held his breath as he entered. Now, he let it out again, almost with a sense of disappointment. It was all so ordinary. A long room lined with books on either side. At the far end, a great wooden desk with a padded leather chair set behind it. Pens on the table, a few papers, an old computer, a small metal box. The window beyond looked out towards a horse chestnut tree with the full splendor of summer. The light in the room had a sweet greenish tint. The boy made for the table. Halfway there, he stopped and looked behind him. Nothing. Yet, he'd had the strangest feeling. For some reason, the slightly open door through which he had entered only a moment before now gave him an unsettled sensation. I wished that he had thought to close it after him. He shook his head. No need. He was going back through in a matter of seconds. 4 hasty steps took him to the edge of the table. He looked round again. Surely there had been a noise. The room was empty. The boy listened as intently as a rabbit in a covert. No, there was nothing to hear except faint sounds of distant traffic. Wide-eyed, breathing hard, the boy turned to the table. The metal box glinted in the sun. He reached for it across the leather surface of the desk. This was not strictly necessary. He could have walked round to the other side of the desk and picked the box up easily. But somehow, he wanted to save time, grab what he'd come for, and get out. He leaned over the table and stretched out his hand, but the box remained obstinately just out of reach. The boy rocked forwards, swung his fingertips out wildly. He missed the box, but his flailing arm knocked a small pot of pins. The pins sprayed across the leather. The boy felt a bead of sweat trickle under his arm. Frantically, he began to collect up the pins and stuff them back into the pot. There was a throaty chuckle right behind him in the room. He wheeled round, stifling his yell. But there was nothing there. For a moment, the boy remained leaning with his back against the desk, paralyzed with fear. Then something reasserted itself in him. "Forget the pins," it seemed to say. "The box is what you came for." Slowly, imperceptibly, he began to inch his way round the side of the desk, his back to the window, his eyes on the room. Something tapped the window urgently, 3 times. He spun round. Nothing there. Only the horse chestnut tree beyond the garden, waving gently in the summer breeze. Nothing there. At that moment, one of the pins he had spilled rolled off the desk onto the carpet. It made no sound, but he caught sight of it out of the corner of his eye. Another pin began to rock back and forth, first slowly, then faster and faster. Suddenly, it spun away, bounced off the base of the computer, and dropped over the edge onto the floor. Another did the same, then another. Suddenly, all the pins were rolling in several directions at once, accelerating off the edges of the desk, colliding, falling, lying still. The boy watched. The last one fell. He did not move. Something laughed softly, right in his ear. With a cry, he lashed out with his left arm, but made no contact. The momentum of his swing turned him round to face the desk. The box was directly in front of him. He snatched it up and dropped it instantly. The metal had been sitting in the sun, and its heat seared his palm. The box struck the desktop and lost its lid. A pair of horn-rimmed spectacles fell out. A moment later, he had them in his hand and was running for the door. Something came behind him. He heard it hopping at his back. He was almost at the door. He could see the stairs beyond that led up to his master. And the door slammed shut. The boy wrenched at the doorknob, beat at the wood, hammered, called to his master in a choking sob, but all to no avail. Something was whispering in his ear, and he could not hear the words. In mortal panic, he kicked at the door, succeeding only in jarring his toe through his small black boot. He turned then and faced the empty room. Small rustlings sounded all about him, delicate taps and little flitterings, as if the carpet, the books, the shelves, even the ceiling was being brushed against by invisible moving things. One of the light shades above his head swung slightly in a non-existent breeze. Through his tears, through his terror, the boy found words to speak.
"Stop!"
he shouted.
"Begone!"
The rustling, tapping, and flittering stopped dead. The light shade's swing slowed, diminished, and came to a halt. The room was very still. Gulping for breath, the boy waited with his back against the door, watching the room. Not a sound came. Then he remembered the spectacles that he was still holding in his hand. Out of the clinging fog of fear, he recalled that his master had told him to put them on before returning. Perhaps if he did so, the door would open, and he would be allowed to climb the stairs to safety. With trembling fingers, he raised the spectacles and put them on, and saw the truth about the study. 100 small demons filled every inch of the space in front of him. They were stacked one on top of the other, all over the room, like seeds in a melon or nuts in a bag, with feet squishing faces and elbows jabbed into bellies. So tightly were they clustered that the very carpet was blocked out. Leering obscenely, they squatted on the desk, hung from the lights and bookcases, and hovered in midair. Some balanced on the protruding noses of others, or were suspended from their limbs. A few had huge bodies with heads the size of oranges. Several displayed the reverse. There were tails and wings and horns and warts and extra hands, mouth, feet, and eyes. There were too many scales and too much hair and other things in impossible places. Some had beaks, others had suckers, most had teeth. They were every conceivable color, often in inappropriate combinations, and they were all doing their best to keep very, very still, so as to convince the boy that nobody was there. They were trying extremely hard to remain frozen, despite the repressed shaking and trembling of tails and wings, and the uncontrollable twitching of their extremely mobile mouths. But at the very moment the boy put on the spectacles and saw them, they realized that he could see them too. Then, with a cry of glee, they leaped at him. The boy screamed, fell back against the door and sideways onto the floor. He raised his hands to protect himself, dashing the spectacles from his nose. Blindly, he rolled over onto his face and curled himself up into a ball, smothered by the terrible noise of wings and scales and small sharp claws on top, around, beside him. The boy was still there 20 minutes later, when his master came to fetch him and dismissed the company of imps. He was carried to his room. For a day and a night he did not eat. For a further week he remained mute and unresponsive. But at length he regained his speech and was able to resume his studies. His master never referred to the incident again, but he was satisfied with the outcome of the lesson, with the well of hate and fear that had been dug for his apprentice in that sunny room. This was one of Nathaniel's earliest experiences. He did not speak of it to anyone, but the shadow of it never left his heart. He was 6 years old at the time.